So Steve, before we get to the third wave, let's talk about the first wave, or the wave lit, 1985 AOL. If we had this interview then, and I said to you, what are the possibilities of this thing you were doing? What would you have said to me?
Well, we probably wouldn't have had that interview then, because you wouldn't have been interested or cared about them. When we got started, only 3% of people were online, and they're only online an hour a week. And for the better part of a decade, till the mid-90s, nobody really knew or cared about what was happening in the internet. It was
What did you think the possibilities were?
I believed it would someday would change the world. I remember reading a book when I was in college, Williams College in Massachusetts, not too far from here, by Alvin Toffler, called The Third Wave.
Yeah.
And I was inspired by it. I was mesmerized by it. He talked about this notion of an electronic cottage and how someday you get information in new ways. So I just knew this would happen.
That was 1980 or something, right? That was even before.
That was 36 years ago. So I worked for a couple of big companies coming right out of college, because there was no internet companies to go to. There was no startup culture at the time. But finally, I found my way into this and co-founded AOL in 1985. But in all seriousness, for the better part of a decade, we were kind of quietly building this thing, and most people didn't know or care. Even when we went public in 1992, it was the first internet company to go public. Most of the institutional investors were like, "What is this? Why would people get on this?" So it took a while to really breakthrough. And that's one of the themes of the book, that perseverance matters. Sometimes revolutions happen in evolutionary ways, so you kind of have to stick with it.
Okay, so first wave is the creating of the infrastructure of the internet. Second wave, as you define it, is what's built on top of it, the Googles, the Facebooks, et cetera. What's your third wave?
It's really integrating the internet seamlessly in every aspect of our lives, because if you really think about it, while in the first wave and the second wave, we've seen a lot of disruption, a lot of innovation, media's changed, communications changed. We haven't seen a lot of this, change and innovation in some of the most important aspects of our lives: how our kids learn, how we stay healthy, how we think about energy, how we kind of think about even things like food.
Well, give us examples. How will kids learn in the third wave differently from how they've learned before?
Well, kids learn differently. They have different styles of learning. Some are more visual, some just need more time with different material. And there are a number of companies now that are doing more personalized adaptive learning systems, and some classrooms have adopted it. Most haven't. I think in the third wave it will become much more mainstream, and teachers will have better tools to teach, and students will have better tools to learn. And even colleges and universities are beginning to experiment with the idea of a flipped classroom, that maybe you watch the professor's lecture in your dorm the night before, and when you come to class, you actually have a discussion with the other students and the professor, so it's more interactive. So learning is complicated, and teachers will do different things depending on what they're trying to accomplish, but having more support of technology, not just having PCs in the classrooms, but things that really allow them to customize the learning for different students who are learning at different paces, is going to be one of the big themes in the third wave.
You haven't said in my book, The Third Wave. I know
I'm supposed to promote the book, The Third Wave. This is the first time I've written a book, but when you go on these book tours, the publishers, make sure you promote the book, The Third Wave. So
how about healthcare? How's that going to be different for me and my family in the third wave?
Well, healthcare is really three parts. How do you stay healthy? How do you manage chronic disease, heart disease, diabetes, things like that? And then how do you deal with more life-threatening things like cancer? And there's now innovation happening in all three of those. There's a lot of interest in the health wellness things like wearables. Companies like Fitbit have emerged. We're seeing similar innovation now around managing diabetes in better ways, and much more personalized medicine in terms of things like cancer. Right now, it's still a lot of guesswork. MD Anderson, which does a lot of work in cancer, says when they get people coming to them for second opinions, 25% of the time they reverse the first opinion, which just shows you that this needs more data and more of a precision approach to health and medicine. That's going to be one of the big themes of the third wave.
So it's the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the Fitbits. It's the disruptors, essentially. Is that the shorthand for this? Yeah.
There's always disruptors. At the beginning of the second wave, 15 years ago, companies like Facebook didn't exist, Twitter didn't exist, YouTube didn't exist, Skype didn't exist, the iPod didn't exist. So we've seen these things come into go from sort of niche-y, fringy, crazy ideas off on the sides to now being a part of everyday life. And the third wave will see the next evolution. And it's not just about the technology or even the business. It's also going to change everybody's lives in terms of how they think about health, how they think about learning, and even how they think about work. We're now seeing the gig economy, the flexible economy, where people think about jobs and work in a much different construct. So part of the reason I decided to write the book is that having giving people a sense of where things are going and how they, in their own lives, can manage it and navigate it, I think is going to be important.
Speaking of their own lives, as we transition second to third wave, income inequality obviously is the buzzword for virtually every political debate. How are What's that going to be like in your estimation in this third wave?
I think it's going to be a mixed bag. I think there are going to be new opportunities that are created by the third wave. There are a lot of interesting startups in financial services, for example, fintech, that are reaching out to people that right now aren't part of the banking system, sort of the unbanked, and creating better ways for them to borrow money, not getting ripped off by like the payday lenders. So that will create some opportunity for some, but we'll also see some jobs eliminated because of technology, because of productivity. So it's always going to be a mixed bag. And I think the challenge is how you maximize the benefits of the third wave and hedge against some of the risks.
There's some bad news for Massachusetts. I read something, I don't know if you wrote in your book or it was in the Wall Street Journal or something, about somewhere in the neighborhood of 75% of investment capital, California, New York, and Massachusetts. You don't think that stranglehold is going to hold, do you?
It's not going to hold. I mean, most of that actually is California. Massachusetts, particularly Boston, punches way above its weight. It's doing quite well. New York City is doing quite well. But I think we'll see innovation more evenly dispersed around the country. I've traveled around the country on these Rise of the Rest bus trips. We visited a couple dozen cities like Pittsburgh and Nashville and Madison and New Orleans, all kinds of great cities. And we're seeing great innovation happening in those cities. New Orleans, for example, has emerged as one of the great education technology cities because a lot of teachers moved there, Teach for America teachers and others.
It's also an all charter school city.
A lot of charter school, and because it's charter school, they're more willing to try new things. So I think Boston is very well positioned. The way I look at it, it really led in the first wave because some of the pioneering companies that were in the computer business and even the creation of the internet, like BBN, were here, was a little less important, to be honest, in the second wave. Some of the consumer internet center of gravity did shift to Silicon Valley, but I think it has a huge opportunity in the third wave, and even GE moving here because it's going to be one of the leading companies in what they call the industrial internet. I think bodes well for Boston and the startup ecosystem in the Boston area.
When I was reading your book, The Third Wave, I was watching. Thank you. That very book.
Thank you.
I was watching one of the presidential debates, and as I'm looking at your pages and then looking up at the screen and back and forth, I'm saying to myself, according to you, they must be debating all the wrong things.
Yeah, it's been a noisy, contentious year.
No, I don't mean the tenor. I mean, for when you hear the debate over the Affordable Care Act, for example, should it be the Affordable Care Act? Should it be single payer? Should it be repealed? I mean, your view is that's almost yesterday's news.
It's sort of, they're talking about things that don't seem to be, to me, that relevant to where we're going and that relevant to most people's lives. And the examples you mentioned are important. You hear this Obamacare thing, I'm going to veto it on day one. And other people say, no, I'm going to extend it. Well, the reality is the real innovation we need in healthcare is going to come from the startups. It's going to come from the entrepreneurs. Similarly, in education, I'm going to eliminate the Department of Education. I'm going to expand the role of the Department of Education. Let's focus on what the innovators are doing, the teachers and the entrepreneurs in that sector. Or in financial services, the big debate is these banks are too big to fail. We need to do something with Dodd-Frank to figure out a way to make sure the economy. I think they're too big to innovate. And the big challenge to the banks is not from the regulators, it's going to be coming from the entrepreneurs. And those themes seem to be missing from the debate. We actually looked at the debate so far, like 600 or 700 questions. Less than a half a dozen, less than 1% were on the issues that are, I think, most central to what's happening in this third wave.
Speaking of regulators, what's the intersection of government and the private sector in the third wave? I mean, the most recent example, of course, is the nightmare between Apple and the FBI, the Justice Department. How do you see that relationship?
I think
going
it's going to become much more important. The connection between the innovators and the policymakers is going to be much more important in the third wave. It actually was important in the first wave. The internet was stood up by government funding and some changes in terms of the Judge Green breaking up the phone companies, unleashed competition, and Congress passing the Telecom Act to offer commercial access to the internet kind of did a lot. Second wave, the government was more on the sidelines. Third wave is going to be much more front and center because these sectors are regulated. The food our kids eat, the drugs our parents take are going to be regulated. So there's going to be more of a government role in the third wave, and the smart entrepreneurs are going to figure out ways to partner with these regulators, not just ignore them. And the smart companies, the large companies today, will figure out a way to partner with the entrepreneurs so they have innovation not just within their company, but build a network around their company. That's part of what I was trying to convey in the book.
Let's talk Nostradamus for a second. The second wave, vis-a-vis what I do, social media has changed everything, obviously, from Arab Spring to how I get my news in the morning. What's the fate of old media, television? newspapers. What's the fate of old media?
Well, I think it's been challenged, and I think it will continue to be challenged. Just this week, for example, Facebook launched Facebook Live, and a lot of people are looking at that as a new platform, launch a 24-hour kind of Facebook Live network. And so I think you'll continue to see innovation in that space. And on balance, think it's been great watching the evolution of the first and second waves, that everybody now has a voice. When I was growing up, unless you were affiliated with one of the 3 TV networks or you owned a newspaper or magazine, you didn't have a voice. So I like that. At the same time, everybody having a voice doesn't mean everybody's voice is accurate or necessarily equal. And I think there's a role for trusted brands and trusted journalists, and that will become even more important in a world of infinite voices. But the business models will get challenged. They have been already. That will continue to be the case.
You've written a lot about immigration. I know you're a comprehensive immigration reform kind of guy. How should immigration go, according to Steve Case, for the third wave to be as productive for both the economy and real people?
Well, the key thing there, and I know immigration is a complicated emotional issue, and this year has become a politically charged issue, is if we don't continue to win what's now a global battle for talent, America will lose its way, and we will no longer be the most innovative entrepreneurial nation. Full stop. Part of the reason we have been so successful, and I remind people, particularly in Washington, 250 years ago, America itself was a startup. It was just an idea. And now we're the leader of the free world because we have the leading economy. Why? Because entrepreneurs kind of led the way in the agricultural revolution, then the industrial revolution, then more recently the technology revolution. And 40% of the Fortune 500 companies that came from those sectors were from immigrants. And so being able to attract immigrants here who have ideas, who are passionate about those ideas so they can create companies and create jobs is important. Of course, we need to also do a better job of educating our kids and create more incentives around engineering and more creativity and things like that. But if we lose this magnet status we have, and Boston is a great example. The university, a lot of people come from all over the world to study here, but all too often they're then kicked out and forced to go to other places. I met one entrepreneur who was at Wharton, started a company, wanted to stay in the United States, was kicked out, went home to India. That company, Snapdeal, now has 5,000 employees and it's worth $5 billion. And he wanted to stay in this country, and we kicked him out. So we have to figure out some way to come together politically and pass immigration reform so we can, in fact, win this global battle for talent.
You don't have to worry when that other Wharton grad becomes president, everything's going to be just fine.
We'll see what happens.
Okay, so if I had attempted, you said I wouldn't have even interviewed you in 1985 because I wouldn't even known you exist. So let's fast forward to, 2016, 2021. You're back here. Tell me the most significant changes we will see in the third wave in the next 5 years.
Well, I think even the idea of the internet will go from being sort of this phenomenon to being just more part of everyday life, like electricity. 100 years ago, electricity was like this newfangled invention. Now we kind of take it for granted, at least in this country. There are obviously parts of the world where they don't. But most people in this country kind of take that for granted. The internet, at some point, we're going to take for granted. And even the concept of the hyphenated internet, like email, or e-commerce. I think it'll just be mail and commerce. It'll be built into everyday life. And that's part of the whole theme of the third wave. It's taking it to the next step. The first wave was building it. Second wave was building apps on top of it. The third wave is integrating it and everything in seamless and sometimes even invisible ways, both on the consumer internet side and on the industrial internet side.
Steve, before you go, you were hanging out with Deval Patrick, our former governor. What are you two guys doing?
Well, he's a great guy. We worked together on a number of different initiatives. He joined us on one of these Rise the Rest bus tours when we were going up the Northeast in Maine, and he's very passionate about entrepreneurship, very passionate about impact investing. When he stopped being governor, he joined Bain and working on an impact fund. And impact investing is one of the themes of the book, because there are a lot of entrepreneurs now and investors and customers that basically want to work for or do business with companies that stand for something more than profit. They also stand for purpose. They're trying to have an impact. And I think there's going to be a wave in this third wave of these impact companies, and Deval is really leading the way there.
I'm sorry, but I forgot. The name of the book?
The name of the book is The Third Wave.
The Third Wave by Steve Case.
Steve Case. Forward by Walter Isaacson.
I know who he is.
And a blurb by Jeff Immel.
I noticed that.
GE coming to Boston.
Steve, it's great to meet you.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much. Good luck with the book.
Appreciate it.